Welcome to Faith and Science. I'm Dr. John Ashton. Back in 2007, I had an article published in Chemistry Australia called A Creationist View of the Intelligent Design Debate. And I stated the evidence that I saw as strongly pointing to the fact that there is overall evidence for design in nature and creation by an intelligent designer, as opposed to evolution's random mutation theory of origins. And a number of scientists strongly objected to my piece being published, claiming that I'd used, made-up arguments or arguments that have been debunked and so forth. And I subsequently contacted one of those scientists that had objected, and I said, look, I understand that you have problems with my article. You claim that I am wrong, that, the evidence I presented is incorrect. I said, where's your evidence that I am incorrect? And his reply was, well, we don't have the evidence yet, but we will. So at that time, they didn't have the evidence that my claims and the evidence that I'd put up, that we now have overwhelming evidence for intelligent design. Those scientists didn't have the evidence that I was wrong, even though they had claimed that. And 12 years have passed, and now much more evidence has accumulated that evolution never happened and is absolutely impossible. It cannot explain our origin of life on Earth. And just recently, a Yale University professor has come out and renounced his belief in evolution, his belief in Darwinian evolution, and he now believes in biblical creation. Now, this professor is actually quite a famous mathematician and computer programmer. His name is Professor David Hillel Gelernter, and he's a professor of computer science at Yale University. He is also a senior fellow of Jewish thought at the Shalem Center in Jerusalem. He's the chief scientist for Mirror Worlds Technology. So he is quite a prominent scientist, and he says that he was swayed by scientific evidence into abandoning the materialistic theory of Darwinism. And he points out that the evidence that changed his mind falls into three actual general categories of science. And he looked at the claims that natural selection and genetic mutations and the fossil record were evidence of evolution. And when he examined these, he found that the evidence just wasn't there to support evolution. Matter of fact, he writes, what I have seen in their behaviour, talking about people teaching evolution across in Western colleges, he writes, and what I have seen in their behaviour intellectually and at colleges across the West is nothing approaching free speech on this topic. It is a bitter, fundamental, angry, outraged rejection of, in effect, what is intelligent design, which comes nowhere near scientific or intellectual discussion. I've seen it happen again and again. And I think what he says there really sums up the situation that we have now with people wanting to impose evolution in our school curriculum, censor any evidence for creation. such as what I experienced over 12 years ago, where these scientists want to close down the evidence that I was putting forth, that biblical creation and the account of biblical creation in the Bible fits the scientific evidence far better than the theory of evolution and long ages. And they wanted to close me down. Matter of fact, they did at that time. They wrote to the executive of the Royal Australian Chemical Institute and suggested that, you know, what I had written would bring discredit on the Institute, and of course the Institute, under that pressure, decided to pull my article from the electronic version of the magazine, although the hard copy was still out. And of course, if any of you listening would like to read up about that account, it's been written up under the title Chemists in a Stew. If you Google Chemists in a Stew, and it will probably come up, or my name, John Ashton, you can read the details of that account. But it fits exactly what this Professor David Galerntner has pointed out, that across colleges there is, and I'll quote him again, "There's nothing approaching free speech on this topic. It's a bitter, fundamental, angry, outraged rejection of the evidence for intelligent design, which comes nowhere near scientific or intellectual discussion." And that's what I found when I was happy to talk to this other university lecturer that had objected to my piece. There were a couple of professors and this particular lecturer that had objected, and well, I'm happy to discuss. If I'm wrong, if the evidence that I'm putting up has been genuinely disproved, I want to know about it. And again, when I spoke to him about, well, what's the evidence that you have? His reply, well, we don't have the evidence yet, but we will. But in actual fact, as I've just said, the evidence now is overwhelming. It's interesting, though, when you Google David Hillel Galerntner, and I'll spell his last name out in case any of you want to do this. It's Gelernter. So if you just Google David Galerntner, Yale University, you'll see this topic has come up in his renunciation of evolution and so forth. And when I've looked at some of the websites of the very strong supporters of evolution that have come out, they've been, quite amazed that a person who is regarded as a polymath, he's responsible for some of the major advances in computing that have been developed in recent times. And, they're really surprised that they're saying, well, how can such an intelligent guy, reject evolution? And they claim that his reasons, for example, one of his reasons is the massive explosion of different types of animals that we see in the fossil record when we go from the Precambrian to the Cambrian. When the Precambrian, there's hardly any fossils. They're very sort of basic, the very small little creatures, but again, still highly complex. And then suddenly in the Cambrian, we have these, just the next layer or two of rocks, suddenly we find this massive amount of fossils, all different types of fossils. And there's no evolutionary progression for these fossils, and they're all fully developed. They're highly complex, nautiluses, which are highly intelligent animal like octopuses, from what we would regard from, their structure, and trilobites, this multi-segmented, highly complex animal with complex eyes, complex body parts, reproductive system, and so forth. And they're all there. It's fascinating, and that we have this massive explosion, and yet the evolutionists attempt to explain this, that somehow these mutations were able to all line up very quickly at that time. But there's no evidence for that. They have to believe, the evolutionists have to believe a fairy tale. One of the important areas that Professor David Galerner points out is the mathematics and the probability of the genes arising by chance is just so low. The amount of mutations that would be needed to produce a viable protein are very, very large. But secondly, that viable protein has to be one that's significant in the organism and can actually make a change that fits in with all the other proteins. And if a bacteria needed one more protein, for example, calculations were published back in 2015 that estimated the probability of a simple bacterium evolving with only the very basic essential proteins. The probability was in the order of 10, or a probability was less than 1 in 10 to the power 167,500. So it's a huge, just from the mathematics, it's just so improbable that evolution can occur. And these are the things that a mind like David Galerner recognised. The amazing mutations and structures of different in different animals. When you look at just the pictures under electron microscope of some of these tiny little insect parts, tiny little insects, that are very small little flies, that sand flies and these sort of little animals that are so small, and yet we look at their parts under the microscope and they're so designed for specific functions, and their structures all work so specifically. The other aspect of the fossil record, which was one other reason he rejected evolution that he talks about, particularly in this Cambrian explosion, is again, as I just mentioned, we have this huge variety of animals that are formed in this, that are buried there, that have been, obviously exist, but there's no evidence for how they evolved. The evidence again is overwhelming, and Stephen Meyer has published his book, of course, on the Cambrian explosion there, and the powerful evidence again how this refutes the evidence that evolution can explain our origin of life. It's interesting, as Yale, of course, is one of the Ivy League universities in the United States. It's a very prestigious university and he has a prestigious position there. And it's interesting if you look at some of the websites there, although he hasn't been, he's not completely ostracised by all parties for his change in beliefs, and that is perhaps due to his prestige. Galerner describes the extreme anger and hostility that evolutionists have for anyone who denies their worldview. One of the commentators writes, the reason rational scientists who supposedly apply nothing but impassioned logic to their work, they transform into fist-shaking, angry people. As Galerner says, that evolution goes beyond science and simply serves as the basis of their atheistic worldview. According to Galerner, and I'll just quote him now, you take your life in your hands to challenge it intellectually. They will destroy you if you challenge it. And for anyone who wants the reference to that, that's cited in an article by J. Kabany, Kabbany, and it's titled Famed Yale Computer Science Professor Quits Believing Darwin's Theories. If you Google that article will come up. And, this is essentially what they're saying is that the scientists can't practice science in this area. if you go against Darwinism, it's like a military operation against you. And this is really concerning. And this, again, should immediately raise red lights to people that are responsible for education and those of us that are having children or grandchildren being educated, that we now have a belief system being imposed in Western society which is simply a pillar for atheism. It's simply supporting the religion of atheism. And the scientists are supporting their view with a sort of religious fanaticism that is excluding anybody else from challenging that belief. And why? Because they want to, they have to undermine God, because I guess God is the existence of God and the overall evidence that we have right in our faces from the fossil record, from the world around us, of living organisms that are so complexly designed, and their designs serve complex functions and amazing functions that scientists are still studying, today. Galenta talks about intelligent design as a viable scientific theory capable of replacing Darwinism. It should not be rejected out of hand in a bigoted manner as the evolutionists do. Galenta points out that design is the most obvious explanation for the complexity of life. And he goes on to say that Darwinism was formulated to explain how seemingly designed organisms assembled themselves by evolution. Unfortunately, intelligent design while it is one of the most important intellectual issues of modern time, and has a real capacity to bring about important changes in how we look at science and really improve scientific research, the ability for people to be able to learn about intelligent design seems to be, a really important matter and something that really should be allowed. Evolution can't really, given the evidence that we have now, this continual education of evolution in our schools really needs to be challenged. So what does Galenta believe now instead of Darwinism? Well, based on his rejection of Darwinism, Galenta is now a biblical creationist. It doesn't automatically follow, of course, so that would be, but according to Galenta, he still claims that evolution is a beautiful and brilliant scientific theory because it can explain some of the processes in life. And, of course, natural selection occurs, and we see that happening. We see, for example, if animals with short fur are exposed, or the animals that can have both short and long fur are exposed suddenly to very cold climates, the short fur animals don't survive to breed very well, and the long fur varieties take over. But this variety there is part of the original intelligent design that was there, that is carried in the genes. It's not new genetic information. He said, Galenta, points out that living organisms show amazing evidence of this intelligent design. So when we again look at why scientists and most of the education system today teaching evolution, it's because the teachers have been taught evolution and their teachers were taught evolution. And so why do most, when you argue, why do people argue, well, most scientists believe in evolution? And the reason, if you ask these scientists why they believe in evolution, they will say, well, because most scientists believe in evolution, and that's what they've been taught. It's so important to recognise that we have a system now that has been promulgated by education and sanctioned by education that is really just powerful evangelism for atheism. And what the real alarm bell issue is that when people come out and challenge and say, whoa, hang on, evolution doesn't work. We don't have the evidence for a mechanism. We don't have the evidence in the fossil record. We don't see new types of body parts evolving. We only see, the type of evolution that results from the loss of genetic information, not the gain of new genetic information. We see natural selection as removing genetic codes, losing information. All this evidence that is counter to Darwinian evolution being able to produce the new theory of life, and yet this evidence isn't being able to be discussed freely. It's not being able to be pointed out to the students. So we have really quite a serious issue. So it's very significant, and I think that someone with the status of a Yale University professor who, again, has been responsible for major developments in the area of mathematics and computing, obviously has a brilliant mind and has come out and spoken and recognised that we have a really serious problem here, that the evidence for a creator God who designed everything is just overwhelming. And it's a very important message that one of the reasons why this isn't getting out in schools is that certain groups within the science who are really hardcore atheists, it would seem, become very bitter and angry and outraged of the possibility that there could be evidence for God, and they're very determined to suppress that evidence. If listeners are interested in reading more on this, if you Google creation.com and again just enter in David Gelernter, the articles will come up about him with the references to the different websites, or just Google his name. There's quite a lot of discussion there. Of course, there are many other scientists that are now speaking out against evolution. I think I mentioned a little while ago that over 1,000 scientists, all with doctorates in areas related to biology or geology, have now signed a petition saying that they dissent from believing that Darwinian evolution can explain the origin of life. And again, if you Google dissent from Darwinism, those websites will come up. In my view, the fact that we're not recognising intelligent design in nature is hindering the development of science. It's hindering scientific research. Some people say, and I know, the Science Guy program in the United States, is saying, if we teach evolution, if we teach creation, it's going to dumb people down. Well, I think the evidence is quite the opposite of that. We already have journals of science that are looking at nature and looking to develop scientific devices, machines and compounds that actually mimic nature. I was just reading an article recently about, the octopus. Now, octopuses if they have a limb cut off, one of their tentacles cut off, they have the ability to regrow that tentacle back to the original size. It grows back just pretty well identical to the original tentacle, the same length, same size and everything. And this ability to regenerate lost tissue, organs and other appendages has attracted much research interest with huge medical ramifications for ourselves. And the fascinating thing is that the biochemistry of how the octopus does that is still a mystery. It's still being studied. They know that there's a cascade of chemical signals that is involved in orchestrating multiple specific biochemical steps. And these, for example, trigger the key control and arrival of a mass of stem cells and blood vessels to the injury site and their subsequent mobilisation. Scientists are really trying to study this mechanism, because if we could understand this, the potential is huge that when somebody has a limb accidentally severed, or parts of organs again have to be cut out because of cancer, how we could grow them again. And again, as scientists are looking at this really complex biochemistry in an animal like an octopus that they claim developed very early on in the evolutionary process, millions of years in the fossil record. And of course we have nautiluses, and they may have been able to do the same. We don't know. And they're back right down at the bottom of the fossil record. And the biochemistry is so complex that teams of scientists are still trying to figure it out. And yet the people that believe in evolution are saying this amazing system just arose by chance. And yet the chemistry is so complex and interconnected and interlinked. And when we look at how chemistry works, how science works, how the chemical reactions works, when you understand the complexity of that, it's so easy to see that it's absolutely impossible for it to have occurred by chance. And it's very specific and unique in this particular octopus animal. Its chemistry is very unique. And yet if we studied this, if we believe in a creator designer and we begin to look for purpose, and we would begin to look at these chemical reactions and understand nature more, I believe we would advance science much more rapidly. I think what David Galenta has come out and pointed out to us is so important, that there's a lot of opposition there, and that opposition isn't based on open science. It's based on a fanatical religious belief in atheism that is spreading atheism and is trying to stop anyone raising the obvious and clear objection that atheism can't be true. We have overwhelming evidence for a creator, and a loving God creator of that, as the Bible reveals. Because this creator, if he can create us, surely he can communicate with our minds and give us the message that we find in the Bible. To remember to listen to these programs, you can Google 3ABN Australia, or one word, .org.au, and click on the listen button, and the Faith and Science and other programs will be there. Well, you've been listening to Faith and Science. I'm Dr. John Ashton. Have a great day.
You've been listening to a production of 3ABN Australia Radio.